Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi arrived in Beijing on May 6th, just 8 days before Donald Trump's scheduled summit with Xi Jinping, and China described the visit in only 4 carefully chosen words: regional and international developments. On the surface, the phrase sounded routine, almost deliberately bland, but in diplomatic language, that level of vagueness often signals the opposite of insignificance. It usually means the discussions are too sensitive to summarize publicly. It means the real purpose of the meeting is happening behind closed doors, away from cameras, while the world watches the Gulf crisis intensify in real time. And the timing of this visit matters more than almost any official statement surrounding it. Iran did not send its foreign minister to Beijing after Trump's upcoming summit. It sent him before. That sequence alone tells you this was not a ceremonial diplomatic stop. It was strategic positioning ahead of what may become the most consequential geopolitical meeting of the year. To understand why this matters, you have to look at the broader pattern of diplomacy unfolding around the Strait of Hormuz since the war began. Araghchi's trip to China did not happen in isolation. In the days leading up to his arrival in Beijing, he visited Pakistan, Oman, and Russia. The exact countries now deeply connected to every active diplomatic channel surrounding the conflict. Pakistan served as a mediator during ceasefire negotiations. Oman played a central role in facilitating back-channel talks before the war escalated. Russia became involved in discussions surrounding Iran's nuclear program and potential security arrangements tied to any future settlement. And China remains the one country both Washington and Tehran increasingly see as capable of influencing the future balance of power in Hormuz. The order of these visits is extremely important because it suggests Iran is systematically shaping the diplomatic environment before the United States arrives for high-level negotiations. Tehran appears determined to ensure that every major intermediary, every important regional player, and every strategic power involved in the next phase of the conflict hears Iran's position directly from Iranian leadership before America has the opportunity to frame the narrative itself. That changes the balance entering the Beijing summit. It means Trump may arrive at the negotiating table facing counterparts who have already spent days hearing Iran's interpretation of the war, the ceasefire, the blockade, and the future of Hormuz. China's role in all of this has often been misunderstood by mainstream coverage. Many commentators still describe Beijing as a cautious observer, standing quietly on the sidelines. But that interpretation ignores the scale of China's diplomatic activity since the conflict erupted. Since February, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has held dozens of meetings and phone calls with officials across the Gulf, the Middle East, and beyond. China coordinated ceasefire messaging with Pakistan, maintained continuous communication with Iranian officials, discussed regional stability with Gulf governments, and consistently positioned itself as an indispensable diplomatic actor without ever formally entering the conflict militarily. That distinction is critical. China has managed to increase its influence without exposing itself to the military and political costs that the United States continues to absorb. While Washington deployed naval assets, enforced pressure campaigns, and expanded military operations tied to Hormuz, Beijing focused on diplomacy, economic positioning, and strategic patience. In geopolitical terms, that approach has allowed China to steadily accumulate leverage while maintaining the appearance of neutrality. But China's neutrality is more complicated than it appears publicly. Very early in the conflict, after the opening military strikes against Iran, China openly criticized the operation and framed it as a violation of international law. Beijing publicly supported Iran's sovereignty and territorial integrity in statements that Tehran almost certainly interpreted as politically significant. That moment established an important foundation between the two governments. Iran understood that China was not fully aligning itself with the American position on the legality of the war, and that perception appears to have strengthened strategic trust between Beijing and Tehran ever since. That context explains why Araghchi's visit now matters so much. He is not merely conducting a standard diplomatic briefing, he is potentially giving China something far more valuable: the private negotiating picture before Washington's leadership arrives. Public statements are one thing, closed-door diplomatic assessments are another. Iran's foreign minister has been present during nearly every major negotiation connected to this crisis. He understands where talks failed, which demands are symbolic, which demands are genuine red lines, and where flexibility might still exist. If China receives that information before Trump's summit, Beijing enters the upcoming negotiations with an enormous informational advantage. And that advantage matters because the United States increasingly needs China's cooperation. Washington's broader strategic problem is becoming harder to ignore. Despite military pressure, naval operations, sanctions, and diplomatic efforts, the core issue driving the conflict remains unresolved: control and stability in the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire reduced the intensity of direct bombing, but it did not restore true stability to the region. Shipping insecurity continues. Energy markets remain volatile. Military tensions persist. Missile alerts, drone incidents, and naval confrontations continue to undermine confidence that the crisis is genuinely contained. This is where China's leverage becomes particularly important. Beijing maintains economic relationships with Iran, holds influence through energy markets, and has the ability to communicate with all sides of the conflict simultaneously. That places China in a uniquely powerful position ahead of the May 14th summit. Trump may arrive in Beijing seeking help stabilizing Hormuz, reducing pressure on oil markets, and potentially reopening diplomatic pathways with Tehran. But China enters the same summit without facing the same urgency. That imbalance is one of the most important realities shaping current geopolitics. China's strategic petroleum reserves remain strong. Chinese-linked energy flows continue operating. Beijing has spent years diversifying supply chains and preparing for disruptions in global energy markets. That preparation reduces the immediate pressure China feels from instability in Hormuz compared to the United States and many of its allies. In other words, Washington needs solutions faster than Beijing does. And in negotiations, urgency often determines leverage. That is why many analysts increasingly believe the broader strategic balance of this conflict may be shifting beneath the surface. Militarily, Iran suffered significant damage. Its infrastructure, economy, and regional capabilities absorbed major pressure. But diplomatically, Tehran has remained active and adaptive. Instead of becoming isolated, Iran has deepened coordination with multiple powers simultaneously. It has maintained channels through Pakistan and Oman, strengthened discussions with Russia, and expanded strategic communication with China. The result is that Iran still retains meaningful diplomatic relevance despite the military strain it faces. Meanwhile, the United States increasingly appears reactive rather than proactive. Many of Washington's major moves over the past several weeks have looked like responses to rapidly changing developments rather than carefully controlled strategic advances. Project Freedom, naval operations, pressure campaigns, and emergency security measures all reflect attempts to stabilize an environment that remains deeply unstable. Every new incident in Hormuz further demonstrates that the ceasefire did not truly resolve the underlying conflict, and this is where China's strategy becomes especially effective. Beijing does not need to dominate the battlefield to expand its influence. It only needs to become diplomatically indispensable. China's goal may not be direct confrontation with the United States at all. Instead, it appears focused on positioning itself as the country every side eventually has to speak with in order to reach any durable outcome. That approach allows China to accumulate influence quietly, steadily, and with relatively low risk. The symbolism of Aragchi arriving in Beijing before Trump is therefore impossible to ignore. Iran reached China first. Tehran had the opportunity to shape conversations first. Beijing had the opportunity to hear Iran's private perspective first. By the time the American delegation lands for the summit, China may already possess a much clearer understanding of what Tehran wants, what Tehran fears, and what Tehran may ultimately accept in any future settlement. That changes the diplomatic landscape dramatically, because at its core, modern geopolitics is not only about military strength, it is also about timing, access, information, leverage, and positioning. And right now, China appears to be positioning itself very carefully at the center of all five. This is why today's meeting in Beijing should not be viewed as routine diplomacy or symbolic protocol. It represents something much larger, the visible emergence of a new balance of influence surrounding the Gulf crisis. The United States remains heavily engaged militarily and politically, but China is increasingly becoming the power quietly shaping the diplomatic environment in the background. And that may ultimately prove even more important than the battlefield itself.